Hello, Story Seekers. I'm Ben.
I'm Nico, and welcome to the Tiny Bookcase. Right now, you're listening to our favourite part of the week.
Stories, discussion, and a high likelihood of gratuitous obscenities, all to sate the hunger of the bibliomancer, Eusterus.
Our regular listeners will know how it works, but for newcomers, Ben and I have both written a story to the same prompt.
We're about to share those stories with each other and you for the first time. Then we'll workshop them on mic. The prompt for this episode is buzzing. Tell me a tale, would you, Nico?
Buzzing. They say the average person swallows 4 spiders a year on average. I had always thought this baseless. There are so many apertures on the human body, a half-dozen on the head alone. Why would any creature choose the one that is filled with teeth? I laughed when people shared their tales. Invariably an aunt or a cousin somewhere that they would claim had woken up near suffocating on a tarantula the size of a house cat. Poppycock of the highest order. When I felt the first ticklings in my inner ear, my mind did not flit in a moment to arachnids and scuttling limbs, nor would it have been right to do so. I presumed, rather idiotically, that it was a bout of hay fever, some minor irritation that I would soon forget. And forget I did. I have forgotten a great many things as time has gone on. I have no doubt at all that I will forget more and more as time passes, but I remember important things. The buzzing woke me up one night. I was sleeping soundly, well within the parameters set by my doctor. 8 hours, she says, to ensure health of mind and body. It is time for repair, time for the mind to process the traumas of that day. But the buzzing woke me up. I thought perhaps a phone call, some emergency sent in night's darkness to plague my sleep cycle. A family member dead, perhaps. But my cell phone was turned off. Advice again from a doctor, this time my therapist. No devices after 9 p.m. But yet on went that incessant buzzing, and no matter where I searched in my tiny apartment, it got no louder or softer. So I decided it was a delusion of some kind, likely paranoid. It was following me. After all, by definition, paranoia, I feel. I managed to sleep through it, eventually, but when I awoke, there it was again, and as I peed that morning, I thought perhaps with each step I take I might uncover the source. Something must be out of balance. My overnight oats and supplementary tablets did nothing. I sought answers, but I feared another trip to my doctor's. If my heart could manage it, my account balance most certainly could not. A lifetime of pills and conversations had me crippled financially already, so I sought others. Acupuncture, herbs, magic bound in crystals. After all, why not? Modern medicine has found no alternative to my suffering, so why not suffer alternative medicine? The argument made sense to me. They pricked, and they felt the sensation of half a dozen pairs of fingers taking my pulse, adding a strange thrumming to the buzz. It would stop for a moment, and I would think myself freed, and I would never leap for joy, but with even a jostle it began again. Now I am very still. I have the things I need all in sight, so the stillness does not bother me at all. Television has become boring now, I must say, and I know all of the commercials by heart. There is one for a drug which will fix, it seems, all of your problems, but then they tell you it can cause many side effects. I have memorized them all: heart palpitations, migraine, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, internal bleeding. It seems to me it would be better to be sick. When I first sat down to begin watching television. It was no later than 6 in the evening, and the buzzing was so loud that day it had been becoming increasingly loud and more frequent, and near continuous, if I could bear to give myself the truth. I didn't often sit on the couch. It was to me a piece of furniture for socializing, which I did not often find myself compelled to do. But that day I was tired, and it seemed as though I was forgetting how to sit in a chair, so I flopped into the couch. I forget a great many things. I should tell you that I have started forgetting things. I started forgetting to go to work and to eat. The spaces where those ideas come from seem to be filled with the buzzing. Always that hum, the rattling vibration of whatever was wrong with me. My drugs for smiling did nothing, and the ones for calmness even less, so I gave up on them in the end. Perhaps, in its own way, the distraction of the endless buzz has worked its perverse magic. I was not sad because I could not remember how to be. I was not sad, but I did cry as I sat and watched the television that first night. I wept. The tears burned as they came from me, and I touched a hand to my face, and there they were, sticky to the touch. A fear had sprung awake in me, and I thought them blood, but when I lifted my hand to look, they were not red droplets on my fingertips. They were golden, translucent. They tasted sweet. An odd sickness. That eye, the one that wept so, is blind now, of course, cried itself into a state of impossible failure. I don't mind. It's not as though I need it. The television seems to loop so much one eye is enough to see it all. I can scarcely hear it over the buzzing now anyway. I was presently surprised when they began to play holiday movies. I was a little concerned by their planning. I had sat down on the 7th of May, so why were they playing holiday movies now? There was no way I could have sat here for that long, was there? I thought I would take the television remote and check and press the button to confirm. But my arms, I found, did not work. I decided I should just try and sweat it out, this sickness, just stay where I was and wait for it to pass me by. I enjoyed the holiday movies. Now I am somewhat bored of them. They play the same ones every year. Luckily, I have them memorized because I cannot hear a thing they're saying. I speak along with them, and the sticky sweet leaks from my slack mouth. With every shake of my jaw, I hear the buzzing become irritated. It does not stop me. On that first day, I was told my lifeline was long, and I would pull through this if I could just stop filling my body with chemicals. But now I haven't taken a tablet in at least 3 holiday movie seasons. I will be better soon, no doubt about it. Though I am afraid I would miss it then. That sweet taste on my tongue, my good friend, the television, and the buzzing. Won't life be so quiet without it?
What a character! Loved it. The
It's a funny little fellow.
it's yeah. He's sort of obviously at the start it was sort of uncomfortably intense, like always in like a mania or a panic spiral, basically. And I
Yeah.
wrote down evil Woody Allen vibes. Um, but then
Well,
but then it went up a gear and it went into like full like crazy person ranting on the subway. Like I could sort of imagine that happening like in the background. Like,
yeah.
somebody telling this awful tale about what's happening to them, and you just have like loads of disinterested corporate drones trying to read their paper.
They're actually
Um,
talking about like having water on the knee or something. Some.
oh god, I mean, there's some really nice stuff in there. The when you say you start describing the tears in the first instance, and then
Yeah.
you immediately say they tasted sweet. So that's very good writing because that's just pure show not tell.
Yeah.
Because you're not saying then I put it in my mouth and then I thought that it was sweet. It was like they tasted sweet, so it's all implied. It's great.
Yeah.
Um, and then I think my favorite line from the whole thing was, "The sticky sweet leaks from my slack mouth."
Yeah,
That's good rhetoric right there. That's good
it's very
rhetoric.
gross.
Yeah.
It's the whole thing sprang right from the concept of, people say, oh, it's a shared collective, and I thought, what about an actual hive in the mind? What would that be like?
Mm-hmm.
And then as I wrote it, I realized that I could never say those words in it because it would absolutely ruin the entire sort of
Yeah.
illusion I was making, which is a really interesting thing to discover. I was like, and where do I put it? No, nowhere. Put it
Yeah.
nowhere because that's for the other people to figure out.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. There was one note that I had, which is that so the guy himself is obviously as I say, he had this sort of mania panic to him, a bit of a hypochondriac, etc.
Yeah.
But right at the start, you say the average person swallows on average.
Oh, did I?
Yeah, and like
Oh,
that's for me, especially because I'm just doing lots of editing at the moment. Word repetition like that, especially really near the start in where it should be like really punchy, definitely shouldn't exist.
I in all the times that I read it, I just never picked up. I've gone back through it half a dozen times, never picked up on it. This is why we have editors, team. This
Yeah,
is why you have people who say, "Are you aware you did that?" And you go, "No, bugger, I didn't mean to." But no, great catch. I just looked back
yeah.
at it and went, "Yeah, there it is." Like that, directly one on top of each other on the
It's really
layout of
easily
the
done,
page as well. Yeah,
especially when you're like overwriting a section in terms of like having to edit it quite a lot.
yeah,
Because you sort of forget what you did on the third edit because you're on the seventh edit, and all of a sudden you're like, that sentence is really nice, but you just haven't recognised the fact that the previous sentence does exactly the same thing.
yeah. I had it with there were a few. I'd said like hum a couple of times too close together and had to sort of give it a slightly different twist. And so I think, yeah, I got so caught up on not repeating certain words that I missed an obvious one. So yeah, that's an interesting catch. That's
Yeah,
yeah,
because I almost didn't mention it because it could have just been the voice,
yeah,
like that, because people who behave and speak like that do things like that.
yeah,
Um, but just from like a writing perspective, I thought it was too early in the story to be fucking with people like that. So,
true.
so
Yeah,
I called it. But yeah, no, really enjoyed it overall. Liked a lot of the writing again, like as last episode, like a really powerful character as well that you brought to life with your voice really well. But I think the writing also backed it up, and it was. I'm not going to say a lot of fun, but
yeah.
it was definitely
The
uncomfortable in exactly the right way.
I do want to say because I remember like everyone said that fact or variations on that fact as long as I can remember the whole. Did you know
Yeah,
people eat 6, 12, a million spiders, whatever, and it's absolute bobbins. Like there's no truth to it
no.
whatsoever apparently,
It
which
is.
makes
It's a
perfect
fun little lie,
sense.
though, isn't it?
Yeah, sort of harmless. Good way to freak
Yes.
people out.
I always took that with the same pinch of salt of like, um, you know, don't pull funny faces in high winds and things like that. Like,
Oh, because it will get stuck.
yeah,
Yeah,
things like that. It's just all just sort of a bit nonsensical in a way. Uh,
there's one my parents used to say because I've always been quite a high speed chatter was that you got to slow down because you have a set amount of words you get in your life and you're going to run out. If that was true, I would have been silent for the last 10 years at least.
oh, I mean, this podcast wouldn't exist. Um,
Just not at all.
yeah. The whole like getting stuff in various apertures and stuff right at the start was really interesting. I liked that a lot.
Yeah.
Because it's such an uncomfortable thing, and it was clear that you had a really interesting take on it from the start, which is great. It did make me think because I think everyone's got something anecdotally that they'd be like, "Oh, I knew a person who knew a person where this happened to them."
Yeah.
But like my um, a cousin that I'm very close to was on a camping trip once, and they woke up and they had like a baby caterpillar inside their eyelid, and it was
Ugh.
wriggling. It was trying to push its way out. So his eye opened, but he didn't open his eye, and that's how he woke up.
That's That's super
isn't
gross.
it?
The I do know someone who they'd left their sort of earbuds unattended, and then they put them in, and an insect had got into the sort of pocket bit of the earbud,
Mm-hmm.
so like the hole in the earbud, and then was in their ear, and they had to go to the doctor and get it
Just
sort
straight
of
up in the
tweezed
canal.
out.
Oh,
Yeah, it was
oh.
just chilling in there.
Oh dear,
Yeah.
deeply unpleasant. I think you've done the correct thing there that you were trying to achieve, which is just to freak everybody out and make their skin crawl, which is great.
I'm glad. I do like writing horror. I feel like I try to avoid leaning on it because a lot of my concepts when I hear the prompt, my brain goes, "Well, here's how to tell an absolutely horrible story using that." So it's
I
nice
wouldn't be
to
leaning away from that at all. If that's how you
no,
feel, then you should be definitely pushing down that avenue more because that's writing horror is a skill and you're good at
yeah.
it. Um, so I don't see why. Like, please do. If you get more ideas like that, write them.
All right, brace yourselves, gang. We're gonna get a lot more gross stories from me, but right now I'm ready for a hopefully not too gross story from you, Ben.
Let's find out. Buzzing. The spice vendors, curio traders, and wealthy tanners were all gone. Yet the market of Ma'ara buzzed with activity nonetheless. Ripped and singed awnings were slung out above the stalls, letting in shafts of light to sweat the bloody piles they sheltered from the sun. Clouds of black flies, unwilling to depart their feast unnecessarily, rose from the meat on display when a crusader slapped at them with his hand. Abdul wondered dully at why the Christ warriors were letting the meat spoil. The thought rose from the emptiness in his heart, and he recoiled from the ugly shape of it. He let his head loll forward and felt the burning sun on the nape of his straining neck. He tried to pray, but found he could not muster his faith. Pointless chains bound him close to a hitching post. That post had once been frequented by mules awaiting their burdens. Abdul knew his burden. He lifted his head to honour everyone he had lost by watching for every last detail in the horror. Abdul saw stolen coins change hands as the tabarded butchers sold their conquered meat to the never-ending tide of starving Christ warriors. Many of them slogged through mud made up of pulped entrails and congealing blood to reach the stalls. He watched those same hands shaking from exhaustion and hunger seize up their barbaric feast. Greater men, the richly armoured knights, bought flesh by the cartload for transportation to the areas of the city where their soldiers camped. The carts they were used had once been wheeled through throngs to pour tasty tea to sweating shoppers. The hacks and gouges in their aged and painted wood were tattoos of violence, marks made by the faithful. The homes abutting the market bore black smoke stains and splatters baked brown by the morning sun. The rich smell of the roasting fires was unavoidable. He could see through broken down doors that many Christ warriors were sleeping off their full bellies out of the sun. They had found peace with what they had done. 20,000 men, women, and children, defeated, slain, eaten. Abdul did not feel the cudgel pulp the back of his skull, and did not feel it when his hairy skin was peeled to reveal his meat. He did not flinch as he was jointed, nor when the cleaver portioned him. He was gone from the world in bits, added to the jumble of spoiling wares. Robert Lefort swallowed. His pipes felt bruised from disuse as the last mouthful descended to his belly. A remnant of the roasted meat was caught between a gap in his teeth. He sucked the juicy morsel clear after working it loose with his tongue. Robert swallowed again and looked out at the devastation from his vantage point on the mosque's steps. The city was quiet of the normal revelry after a battle. Each man, he reckoned, was grappling with the deed they would never be able to justify. The buzz of flies in the market lingered in his ears, an indelible memory of sin. A ragged tabard kept the worst of the sun from his chainmail. Robert wiped his greasy hands down it before double belting his scabbard back on. The belt had new holes poked in it from where siege hunger had caved in his stomach. The shield he slung over his back was heavy, and the painted heraldic lines were long since obliterated by weather and weapons. The weight of it had near drowned him when the last Romans helped them across the Bosphorus. The bearded axe of his grandfather, engraved with the forgotten gods of his ancestral homeland, felt light in his hands again as the meat gave strength to his muscles. "You must pray." The voice seemed both a whisper and a shout to Robert. It banished the buzzing and gave him purpose. A few crusaders lounged on the steps near him, but none seemed to have spoken, and he felt the truth of the words in his heart, and started up the steps. Some fool had set a doomed fire against the door of the stone-built mosque last night, and the tough old wood had outlasted the vandal flames. The stain of the smoke seemed ugly to Robert as he pushed inside. He saw immediately that his brothers-in-arms had stolen everything, shattered the windows, and left the main chamber bare. Yet a quiet reverence had returned to the space. He recognised the sensation from how he had felt stepping within the cathedral at Sicily for the first time. That had been a grand place to his eyes. A stone pillar near the entrance bore 1,000 newly chiselled crosses. Robert drew his dagger and left a mark of his own in the stone alongside all the others. As he walked through the mosque, it struck him that the walls, vaulted ceiling, and the area for supplication before the pulpit reminded him strongly of a church he had also visited in Toulouse when he was a boy. He wondered how different the prayers could be in buildings so similar. The lance hung from the rafters in the centre of the room. Robert had not been there when they found it in Antioch. The weapon which had pierced Christ's side seemed to shimmer as sunlight bounced from the broken glass on the floor. Robert knelt under it, lowered his axe to the ground, and clasped his rough hands together. "Our Father, that art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, be thy will done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our bread, and forgive our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil." Robert's voice dwindled away as he found his tongue incapable of finishing the prayer. In the darkness behind his closed eyes, the voice came to him again. "All that you do before the lance in my name is righteous." The words sank into him like a balm into a burn. But the freedom from guilt they gave felt wrong somehow, as though it should not belong to him. "I cleanse your heart of darkness, and tell you now that the gates of Jerusalem will open for you, Robert Lefort, my chosen child." Within, he felt as though light were bursting from his belly to fill his heart, cleansing light, healing light. "No sin shall cling to you, nor will hell await you, for you are God's own warrior." The deep calm of surety settled over him, and Robert heard the hardness in his own voice when he finished the prayer. Amen. The army had left Ma'ara behind it and bypassed Tripoli to march south. Some knights claimed that their leaders feared another protracted siege, and that perhaps their crusade had ended in Ma'ara. Robert knew something else to be true. The words of Christ had been heard in more hearts than just his own, and their only choice was to take Jerusalem for the glory of God. The bleak walls of that city were tall, and the gates firmly shut. That had not stopped Robert, who had seized up his axe and called for the faithful to follow him. The charge had been met by arrows spat down from the parapets, stones hurled from embrasures, and the jeers of the infidel. The gates had not opened when Robert pushed them. Yet he had known in his heart that Christ would not have deceived him. Robert buried his grandfather's axe in the wood of the main gate and roared up to beseech the heavens. "Heavenly Father, I am here! I am here!" It felt cold at first, like ice water had been dunked over his head and shoulders. Then the oil melted through his skin to cook the flesh beneath. His sight blurred, skewing to darkness as his right eye burst and dripped down his cheek in a steaming tide. The voice inside him was silenced. Other men, under the rain of oil, screamed and fled. Someone seized him and dragged him away. He heard the man's yells of pain as his hands were burnt by the oil coating Robert, who fell away from consciousness as the light within him was snuffed out. A sea breeze woke him. The soft touch of it prickled his ruined body and brought excruciating heat back to his wounds. He felt partial, as though most of him were gone to ruin and could not move his limbs. The memory of Mara returned to him, buzzing in his melted ear. Robert tried to scream, but only the smallest sound came out of his putty-like lips. A cheer rose up beyond the surgeon's tent, and Robert swiveled his remaining eye to stare out of the open flap. The sea beyond Jerusalem was a rippling bolt of the brightest azure silk. Those gleaming waves bore an armada, and each warship flew the cross proudly among the flags of England and the Genoese. The light within him beamed once more, bright enough that he had doubted that it had ever truly left him. His pain was washed away when Christ spoke to him for the last time. And lo, the gates of Jerusalem are open for you. A tear rolled from Robert's eye.
I said, and I feel like you weren't listening, Ben. I said not gross. I feel like you missed the memo there.
Meat markets and eye
meat
popping.
markets. I normally ask a question, and it's the same question with stories like this, where normally I would say, is this based in historical fact? But I know this one, but I would like you to explain for the lovely people at home where this comes from.
This is 100% true. This happened in 1098 during the First Crusade. Almost all the elements of the story are completely rooted in historical fact. Like the city of Mara, which is in northern Syria today, was besieged. The army didn't have the correct provisions, and they were starving. And when they eventually took the city, they killed and ate all 20,000 inhabitants of the city. Both sides agree that this happened, like Christian sources and Muslim sources both agree that this happened. So it's very unlikely that it didn't happen. There is some debate as to whether or not the people were tortured before they were killed and eaten, but that's sort of irrelevant, really, isn't it? Well, probably not to them, but obviously in hindsight, in terms of the potentially larger crime of cannibalism en masse, that army then basically didn't. It made a beeline for Jerusalem. There were a bunch of other Crusader targets on its way, but it needed to get to Jerusalem in order to sort of feel like it had won. And when they arrived at Jerusalem, the army, unprompted, charged at the walls with no siege equipment, thinking that the city would just open for them, and it didn't, and they got killed. And were it not for the English and the Genoese, that would have been the end of the First Crusade. But they were suddenly supported from the sea, and Jerusalem fell. So yeah, this happened. There's a bunch of other really weird shit that happened during this First Crusade as well. Like there's are you aware of like how they took Odessa, which happened before Mara?
I'm not aware.
So they sort of did this thing. There was this one of these ways that you used to be able to like conquer people was by insisting that their current king adopted you as a son.
Okay.
So there'd be some sort of legitimacy to it. So they didn't really necessarily have the same kind of idea about like bloodlines and like hereditary positions and stuff. It's like you could that was enough if somebody could just say, okay, you're my son now. That gives you some power over this. Like it's just one of the ways that power was transferred. But when it happened, I think it was Bohemond, I think, that did this, but I could be wrong about that. It's basically one of the Norman generals that was in charge of the First Crusade, because it was an entirely Norman army. Pretty much, there were a few like French dukes and stuff like that, but they were mostly Norman.
Lovely touch in the story, by the way, him having the sort of ancestral Nordic axe.
Yeah,
that was a lovely little character thing.
Well, there's just this idea
it's a thing that would have happened.
Yeah. There's just this idea that they disappeared, like the Vikings disappeared. They didn't fucking disappear. They carried on. They created various Norman kingdoms in Sicily, the north of France, in England, and then they just carried on doing all of the things that they were really good at, like
just with new flags.
Yeah, basically, and a new religion. But yeah, anyway, so at Odessa, so what happened was the process for becoming this dude's son was that he had to be like symbolically birthed by this guy.
Oh.
the ruler of Odessa came out in this big fucking cassock thing, a big dress basically,
Right.
and then the leader of this kind of like Norman Crusader army had to crawl under the dress, so that they were under the dress under which the ruler of Odessa was naked, and then be sort of birthed out to sort of symbolically become a part of the family. It's just
Yeah,
nuts.
right.
Just absolutely nuts.
Do you know
And then,
there's a
yeah, go on.
Oh, no, go on.
I was just saying, the next bit that happens before my story takes place is that they get to Antioch, and then they essentially, either through manufacture or legitimately, find the lance that that sort of ended Jesus on the cross,
Yeah,
and they just
the
go
spear
rabid
of
nuts.
destiny. Yeah,
Yeah, basically, they just. I mean, at this point, that spear would have been about 1,000 years old. This happened in 1098.
yeah.
So I think it's unlikely that it was the spear of Christ. But anyway, they so it became this sort of totemic thing for them, and so I wanted to try and capture somebody that was there as like a Norman knight, there to make money, take land, become a lord, and then they do something so horrendous that their mind just breaks, and they can only find solace in this kind of like odd religion.
Do you know there's an odd modern equivalent to that Odessa thing,
Go
in
on.
that in Japan, a lot of men who own businesses and are getting on in age and never had a son will adopt adult men who they want to pass their business on to, because you have to pass your business to your son in Japanese culture.
So
So
that
they're
sounds very similar. Like
yeah,
that's a very kind of yeah, that's exactly the same kind of sentiment, I think. Super misogynistic, right?
oh
Like,
yeah, awful.
but
Like, oh, I have a fully grown adult daughter, but
uh-huh.
this guy's been my second in command for a long time. I'm your dad now.
I think that's
Oh
I'm just this is just pulling this from the sort of vague bit at the back of my brain. But the oldest hotel in the world is in Japan, isn't it? I think it's been running for
yeah,
about 1,000 years or something. I think that happened for them as well. I think like a guy who was like a towel boy and rose up to be the manager, then got adopted by the family and now runs it.
that wouldn't surprise me
Um,
at all. Yeah.
so there's a degree of like earning it to a certain degree, and I guess the first crusade earned it a little bit by turning up with an army and being like, by the way, I'm your son now.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, no, it's an absolutely wild story. Like, I think if you said to most people that did you know that crusaders were cannibals and ate people, they'd be like, but aren't they like holy warriors of God? You'd be like, yeah,
Yes, precisely.
but they
the
got really hungry once.
there was a thing in it that I wanted to know if it was from a historical account or something you'd
Hmm.
come up with, which was the pillar in the mosque with all of the crucifixes carved into, or cruciforms
So
carved into it.
that did happen. It didn't
Yeah.
necessarily happen in Mara, but like
Okay.
that's quite a common form of graffiti, basically, where basically crusader graffiti. They just all go and put a little cross on it. You end up with like like kids who get bored in school and stuff, and they just like make little X's throughout an entire page, or
Yeah.
just something kind of very repetitive. It's like it looks like that, but it's very strange, and it's
It's a really sort of stunning image,
mm,
even mentally, the idea of it, because mosques tend to be, and especially then would have been, unbelievably beautiful, full of like shows of wealth and power and like beautiful architecture, and the idea of just carving your own fairly recent faith into it is fascinating.
well. To be fair, the Muslim faith is younger than Christianity in
Huh.
that regard, but by about 500 years or so, I think.
Yeah,
But yeah, no, but this kind of thing happened quite a lot in the kind of Levant area, like as through the Crusades, which were just straight up mental. This was the first one of four,
yeah,
and there were equally mental things happening in all of them because it's basically just nutters abroad, fueled by jingoism and greed and religious fervor.
yeah.
Um, it's not
Mad.
a good recipe. It's really not a good
I
recipe.
I've got to go through some of the notes I wrote during, because
Yeah,
we've
go for it,
talked about
please.
the Crusade a lot, and I've got lots of nice things I want to say to you.
Mhm.
The first one is I've been trying to put it into words for ages, and it finally clicked for me. And it was because it was a marketplace. You're very good at marketplaces. You
Mm.
get especially that kind of Like, if you were going to write something set in Marrakesh, for example, I think it'd take you about 9 words for me to know exactly where I was.
Mm.
And you have a real talent for mise en scène. Like you know how to say in a very small amount of words, like it's this vibe of a, and very specifically with you, you're really good at like marketplace settings. I don't know what it is, like if it's the kind of media you like, but I can think of a bunch of stories you've written where that feeling of hustle and bustle, or that it's emptier than it should be, or how old the setup is, you managed to capture it very well, and it worked brilliant in this. Like, as soon as those flies were around the meat, I was like, oh yeah, I knew where I was, and something's amiss with it. Really good opening, like, had to be mentioned.
Oh, that's really nice. I
Um,
think I can sort of see what you're saying, because I was just thinking back to like a whole bunch of stories where I've done marketplaces.
yeah,
I can only assume that it's two things. The first of which is that marketplaces are integral to any functioning society.
yeah,
So there's basically always going to be a market. If you have a human population in a human population center, then you're going to have a market that you just have to. So you can probably get the personality of that population center by the thing that it has to have.
yeah,
So there's probably like a degree of like logic to it, but then also I did I went to Marrakesh when I was about 16, and
yeah,
it really sank in for me. Like I love the souk there. I love getting lost in it and trying to navigate it and doing all the haggling and stuff like that. I had a really good time. And I was just blown away by the culture and the splendor of it, but also like the grimy horridness of it. Like tanneries smell awful. Like it's
oh
literally
yeah,
shit and piss. Like it's just all ammonia. And then you can have that, but then you can have like the nicest food that you've ever eaten on one thing, and you can have mint tea in beautiful little glass cups, and it's such an incredible thing. But then just to add to that, I did also grow up with a mother who was she ran her own business, and she did stuff like going to trade fairs. So I
yeah.
was doing stuff like looking after market stalls when I was a kid, like on the weekends. So it is something that I sort of am aware of from a personal and a historical context.
Yeah, I think you deploy it extremely well. Like, you're having, even listening to talk about it, then like you've got that route, and while you are very good at mise en scène, you have a fucking gift for marketplaces. I, I
I'll put
just
it on
feel
the
like
CV.
use it wherever you can. I've got other things. I wrote lots of things down. I'm going to read you some notes. It's a series of 3 short sentences. I'm sure you can guess where it goes in the story. I wrote down, "God is real?" Question mark. Or is this man crazy? Question mark. Nope, they've gone man meet wild. That
Yep,
was
man meat
that was what
wild.
I wrote
That's
down.
correct.
It
Yeah.
was brilliant. We both had a blinding of an eye,
I
which
know,
was
and
a thing.
immobile as well, because he
Yeah,
was immobile by the end.
which is just further proof that we're weird and psychically linked somehow.
There's just no reason for those two things to have happened in both of our stories. That's
No.
very, very strange.
I got the phrase "he was gone from the world in bits." I
Yeah,
love that phrase. It's just because the double meaning of, like, you can be in bits, like you're upset, and yeah, so good, so very good, and him getting counter cooked, lovely, just to go from cooking and eating men to getting all crispened up with the hot oil.
yeah.
Yeah, just loads of lovely turns of phrase in there, man. The siege hunger had caved in his stomach's another one that's just, yeah, conquered meat. I love conquered meat. That's got so much to it. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Really, really interesting bit of history to write about, and a story really nicely and elegantly told in it. So
Thank you.
yeah, that was a good one. I liked that one a lot.
I think that one's been coming for a while, because I told you about the Siege of Mara a while ago,
Yeah,
and
and it freaked me out then too.
yeah. So this has been percolating for a bit, and I think this is the other thing that I really wanted to tackle in this is just like why people start to think that they can hear the voice of God,
Yeah,
and it is like every single time, because I'm aware firsthand of some people that they're no longer in my life, but they have been in my life, that have said that they've heard the voice of God, and it's like and it does always seem funny to me that God always seems to want the things for you that you want for you.
Yeah.
You know, that was always the common thread there. So yeah, I don't know. I think I wanted to try and figure out how somebody could have themselves broken in such a way that that this is happening for them. And yeah, somebody resorting to cannibalism was the in. Yeah, no, I enjoyed that one a lot. I enjoyed writing it. It does feel like sort of potentially a little bit. I don't know. Just for me is the kind of thing that I'm sort of going for there. Like I don't know how much of a general appeal that story's got, but I enjoyed it.
I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing. Like, I think it's interesting that we both wrote what are essentially horror stories for this prompt that could have had a lot of things in an interesting way. Where we talked about we both seem to be trying to go off piste. Like we hear the prompt, we go for the fifth thing rather than the first, second, third, or fourth. But we both heard buzzing, thought insects, and let it guide us. And what it meant was we both wrote things that are kind of for us in our own ways. And I think sometimes it's good to do that. Like if you're writing things that you don't enjoy, like sometimes that might end up being the case, and you should always try things. But like, write what you want to read if it doesn't already exist, because then you can read it. That's a great thing.
I love it. I think that's a wonderful note to end on. Write what you want to read. I think is lovely. It is also better if you can write what other people want to read as well, or at least teach them they want to read it. I don't know. There's a line, but yeah, lovely, great. Your story was fantastic. I think the whole buzzing thing, like we were always going to end up with some fairly unpleasant stories for that.
Some grossness.
I think we weren't going to be like, oh, it was a buzzing night out, were we? that wasn't the way we were going to go.
I was buzzing, mate.
Yeah.
Oh, well, fantastic. Yeah, I'm going to go write one I want to read. I think I'll start with Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I'll write that one. That'll be good.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of The Tiny Bookcase.
Remember to subscribe, otherwise you're going to miss out on the future fun.
Also, tell a friend. If you like this episode, link them to it.
We'd be tremendously grateful. You can follow us on Twitter at BookcaseTiny, Facebook at The Tiny Bookcase, and Instagram at BookcaseTiny for updates. Speaking of supporting the podcast, well, magic can only take one so far. The Tiny Bookcase is supported by the generosity of its patrons. Those kind souls have really kept my belly full the last year. Let's cast a spell for them, shall we? For rich ginger tones on their scalp, let us cast the Orangi Hedondo spell for Scott Byrne. And for general fabulousness, why not the Ooh La La, How's Your Mother spell on Matthew McLaren?
How do you come up with that shit, man?